Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. We have a lot of college football talk to get into. We have the conference championships games later in the week, starting with the Pac-12 on Friday. And we have some college football playoff talk, which we're going to start the show with. We're also going to talk about Shohei Ohtani later in the show, another interesting nugget about him potentially joining the Atlanta Braves. But the college football playoff rankings are going to come out today. We do not know them quite yet, but we do know the scenarios that could potentially happen, and there's a lot of crazy chaos that could go, and there's also chaos that just if there's scratch, who gets in. If all the favorites win, there's still this chaotic argument over who gets in. Does an undefeated Florida State get in, even though they lost their starting quarterback and haven't looked particularly like a really, really good football team that belongs there? Does Texas get in with one loss and that impressive win on the road over Alabama? What if Alabama beats Georgia, and which wouldn't even be a huge upset? Is Georgia out of the college football playoff? Because there's also this aspect of Georgia where they've won 45 of their last 46 games. They've won 2 straight national championships. They've looked unbeatable this entire season. If they lose one game to Alabama like in a neutral site, and let's say it's by a field goal, they lose on a game-winning field goal, are they really going to put, like, an Oregon beats Washington? Is Georgia a better option than Oregon? I know everyone's in love with Oregon and everyone thinks Oregon is just this powerhouse. I'm not there. I think the Pac-12, we started at the beginning of the season talking about the Pac-12 being this great conference, and it was fun to watch. Don't get me wrong, but they don't play defense. I don't think anyone in that conference is really elite. Maybe Oregon's at that level, but are they at the level of Georgia? We saw that Oregon team play, 20 months ago? It was 49-3. Did they make up that big of a gap that you're going to sit there and tell me, both with one loss, that Georgia doesn't get in over Oregon? There's a ton of conversations that could be had, and some of this will be figured out this week, but it has the potential to get crazy. And I don't see a scenario where there isn't at least a intense conversation about who gets in these teams, in these scenarios.
Yeah, I said weeks ago, and it's even more true. Well, it's just more true now because people are starting to see the picture. The picture is becoming much clearer. But I said this weeks ago that there's going to be at least one. And now it looks like there's going to be at least 2 fan bases that are going to be irate when the committee comes out with their final 4. And a couple of them will have arguments for being upset, thinking that they're, one of the best 4 teams, or their resume is above another team. In the committee's eyes, I think, no matter what, I really do think an SEC team is going to get in. And the one case that people can make that is not going to happen is if Alabama wins and then a team like Texas gets in over Alabama, because they have that head-to-head. And I just have a hard time believing the guys who are in a position to benefit from the college football playoff being as big as possible, letting out one of the biggest brands in college football, whether that it's going to be Alabama, if that's the case, because Georgia wins, they're obviously in. I just have a hard time believing an SEC team is not going to be in. It's the biggest brand in college football. Alabama and Georgia are the 2 biggest brands in the biggest conference. I just have a very hard time believing the committee, who stands to benefit from the playoff being as big as it can possibly be in terms of a dollars and cents perspective, leaving out the biggest brand in college football. So I do want to say that. I also want to say that I'm on the opposite side of you with Oregon. I've been on Oregon's side this entire year. I've been in their corner. I think they're the most well-rounded team in the Pac-12. I think they're going to show that on Friday night. I think they handle business against Washington. I'm still baffled that they lost that game initially. And I do think that this is a different Oregon team than the one that just got absolutely steamrolled by Georgia for 2 different reasons. Dan Lanning now has his feet kind of in the ground. Bo Nix has his feet in the ground. And that Georgia team, I could make an argument the Georgia team from last year was more cohesive and more ready to, climb the mountain again than this one is, just in terms of experience. So, and that's mainly at the quarterback position. But I do think that this Oregon team can win a national championship. I really do. They're by far the most well-rounded team in the Pac-12. It's not even close. And I think that they're the 3rd best team. You could make an argument, and I'm arguing it, that they're the 3rd best team in the country behind Michigan, Georgia, and you can make an argument them and Alabama. I think Texas and, unfortunately, Florida State are going to be left on the outside. I think that's what should happen. I don't think that's what will happen, because Florida State's just takes care of business in the ACC championship against Louisville, and they're in. I mean, I don't know how you keep an undefeated conference champion out even without the quarterback. In my perfect world, I'll hand it back to you after this. In my perfect world, and this is not an LSU bias that I hate FSU, because when they beat us, I thought that FSU was a championship caliber football team. They're a very well-rounded team. They got NFL talent on both sides of the ball at the most important positions too, but they don't have a quarterback. And we have a committee for a reason. We don't have a computer deciding this anymore. We have a committee for a reason that says, they don't have a quarterback. This is not one of the best 4 teams in the country, regardless of their schedule.
Yeah. All right. Well, so here's an interesting question, and this is going to be the question that I think a lot of people are ignoring, right? And you're talking about Oregon, but here's the idea. Let's say they do leave out Florida State, or no, let's say Florida State's in, right? And then you get Michigan in. Those are 2 teams that are in. Let's just because they're undefeated Power 5 champions or whatever. Alabama beats Georgia. Texas is getting the nod over Alabama. I don't care what Alabama fans say. Texas is going to get the nod over them. So the only way Alabama gets in this situation, it really comes down to Alabama and Oregon. And the conversation that everyone's been having is Alabama or Texas. The real conversation is in Alabama and Oregon. It's Alabama and Texas played on the road, and they're going to give the nod to Texas. I don't care what any SEC fans, and listen, I would love to see Alabama in there over Texas. I think they're better than Texas, but you literally can't say that. And with that sketchy win against Auburn and the way Texas looked, that Quinn Ewers is healthy now. They won 57-7 in their last game. They go out and dominate Oklahoma State. Texas is going to get the nod in the conversation. So the real conversation comes down to, do you go to Alabama or Oregon? And I think that's the most intriguing argument in all of them, because you have guys like you who are really into Oregon. I'm not there yet. They've lost to the only good team they played. None of the other teams that they've beaten are now ranked. Maybe Oregon State might be 25. But if you really paid attention to that Oregon State game, they were playing with a battered offensive line that was down like 3 starters. They were completely outmatched. They were on the road. There was no chance for them to win that game. It was impressive, but there are reasons why it looked as impressive as it did. But whether you are in love with Oregon or not, if it comes down to Oregon or Alabama, you're going to have to make that decision. And good luck, because I see where you're coming from. Because you're really just saying, like, we don't know. Like, you really do not know. We really don't know until Oregon gets in there and plays it. But I can almost guarantee you, we do know about Alabama. We do know about Alabama. If they beat Georgia, right? So that's what it's going to come. That's the real conversation that I feel like a lot of people are kind of ignoring. They're just like, oh, Pac-12 champions in, SEC championship, or Texas. Well, no, Texas is in over Alabama. So it comes down to a 1-loss Oregon or a 1-loss Alabama. And that's what I think it's really going to come down to in the committees.
See, I'm going to look real hypocritical here, that I think Oregon is a better team than Texas, but I agree with your logic that it will come down to Bama if they beat Georgia and Oregon. And actually, I don't think it's even a conversation at all, for 2 very important reasons. Their resume, Bama's resume is far better than Oregon's. If they
beat Georgia.
They beat Georgia, they beat LSU, they beat Ole Miss. I mean, right there, that's far and away better than what Oregon's is going to be. And 2, the most important thing that people are seemingly forgetting about is SEC bias. It's not SEC bias. It's a real thing, because the SEC, I know what we were saying 6 weeks ago about the Pac-12 potentially being the best conference in the country. No. Not anymore. The SEC, it's not even close. The SEC is still the best conference in the country. You put LSU, which is the 4th best team in terms of record, the 4th best team in the conference, and against any other conference's 4th best team, and it's a 30-point game. That is the difference between the SEC and the Pac-12. So I really just think that this is not even a conversation. If what we are saying, if these scenarios shake out, Bama beats Georgia, Oregon beats Washington, Texas wins convincingly. Texas doesn't even have to win convincingly. They win, they're in. I really think it's not even a question. I think Alabama gets that nod over Oregon. And unfortunately, I think Oregon is a better team than Texas. I really do believe that. But I
definitely think they're a better team right now than Florida State. But
Florida State is probably worse than Ohio State.
And this is just like this is what we're talking about. I mean, there's really no good answers in all these scenarios. And the big thing that comes back to it is all this could have been, if you didn't have that Texas-Alabama game, these are all easy decisions, right? These are all easy decisions. But now you have to give the nod over Texas. We have an injured Florida State where we don't even really know what they are with their backup quarterback. I mean, what they go out and beat Louisville by 30, but then again, Louisville just lost to Kentucky, who's like the 10th best team in the SEC. So there's no good answers. Like the only way that the committee gets out of this alive is if Georgia wins, Oregon wins. Even then, they still have to decide between Florida State and Texas. If both of those teams win, they really badly need.
Well, no, if Georgia wins, they're in. Florida State wins, they're in. Michigan is in. It's going to come down to Oregon and Texas, and then it'll probably be Texas because they have that win over Bama. Well, then again, their resumes are much closer, Oregon and Texas's, than either of them would be to Alabama if Alabama beat Georgia. So that is an interesting conversation, Oregon and Texas. And to me, the resumes are very similar. Texas probably has more impressive wins on the road in Bryant-Denny. But if we're looking at the best team, it's got to be Oregon. It's got to be Oregon over Texas. That's an interesting one too.
I still like that. That's you. I don't think Oregon's a better team than Texas. I don't. These are the conversations they're going to be having because it really is. There is no. I mean, we just went through a million different scenarios. Alabama wins, Georgia wins. Like there's unless Florida State gets upset by Louisville and just knocks themselves out. Then these conversations are going to just be, I don't know how you have them and come up with a winner because you're not going to feel good about anything. And they could totally screw it up, right? And they'll never know if they screwed it up because you're never going to get to see who gets left out play. If Texas gets in, if Oregon gets in over Texas and Oregon gets boat raced by Georgia for the second time in 2 years and Texas is sitting there like, well, Alabama,
we would have done better.
Beat Alabama. Like there's going to be all these what ifs and you're never I think that's the hardest thing about the 4-team playoff, and I think I saw Gary Danielson talking about it on the radio. I was listening to him yesterday, and he was just like, I think the 4 teams was the worst. He's like 2 teams and 6 teams, you don't have these conversations. But there was something about 4 teams where with 5 Power 5 conferences that you never get all those answers, and someone's always left out. And the Pac-12 seemingly always gets left out. But Oregon is the dog. Of all the Pac-12 teams in recent years, Oregon has become a darling team, and it's because they boat race teams, and good for them. But we're going to find out how much that is just Oregon being really good or how much that is the Pac-12 being way overrated to start the year when everyone was really happy about them.
Yeah, I think every college football fan outside of Tallahassee should be rooting for Louisville this weekend. Florida State losing is good for football. If we're just talking about the best teams getting into the college football playoffs, that is the best case scenario. I have nothing against Florida State. You guys just don't have a quarterback. You're not one of the 4 best teams. There could be an argument, even with Jordan Travis, you're probably not one of the 4 best teams. Without him, you're definitely not. So everybody should be a Cardinal this weekend because best case scenario for all of us outside of Tallahassee is that Florida State loses. Everybody who is neutral in this. Obviously, if you're Georgia, you want Florida State in there instead of, say, Oregon, Texas, or Alabama because, I'd love to play a quarterback-less Florida State team if I was Georgia. But if for every other college football fan, if just wants good football to watch, we should all be rooting for Louisville this weekend for Florida State not to get into this playoff because it looks like they're going to get in without a quarterback and just get boat raced, like you're saying, in the semifinals.
Yeah, I mean it is hard to imagine them competing without Jordan Travis. I do really like Louisville's football team. I think it sucks, or not Louisville, Florida State's football team. I think they're good on both sides of the lines. Yeah. I think they run the ball well. I think they have great wide receivers. It sucks that they don't have a quarterback, but I think how they beat Louisville will also be telling. If they barely scrape by after Louisville just got beat by Kentucky, we could be having a different conversation. I mean, I do think there's a scenario where even undefeated Florida State gets passed over just simply because everything has kind of turned out poorly for them down the stretch. 1, Jordan Travis being injured. 2, Louisville losing to Kentucky. I think that's a massive part of this because Louisville losing to Kentucky, and we saw what Georgia did to Kentucky. We saw that. If this game is just like a slugfest, which it very well could be, I think I saw the spread on it was 2.5 points. Yeah. Then I think there's a serious question that we're having. Like, hey, they don't have a quarterback. They're clearly not the same thing without Jordan Travis. But I also wouldn't be surprised at all if Florida State goes out and whoops, just simply because they're more physical on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I thought their quarterback showed some grit at the end of that game against Florida. That's a tough place to play in the swamp. I don't care how bad Florida is. I think it's big that he got that game under his belt, especially coming from behind. So it's going to be wild. That's the only guarantee. Coming up after the break, we're going to stick with this college football thing. Texas A&M has a new coach. They hire Mike Elko out of Duke. We're going to discuss it after the break.